agree to, and I call the honourable member for Monash.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Just as I begin my remarks, I would say to the member for Shortland, Mr Conroy, you said the employer said, I don't want to give you leave entitlements. Well, that's actually not true, because when you're casual, you get paid all of your entitlements as part of your agreement, which you know very, very well. So please don't make remarks to the parliament that leave people in a place where they believe something that is not true. Even under a Labor government, our own Commonwealth car drivers moved from full-time drivers to casual drivers. Why? Because it suits them to be casual drivers. It means they can say at any time, I'm not available in the next 2 weeks. I'm off with my partner, my wife, to do something else. So there are people that choose to be paid for casuals. As an employer, I know that when I had casual employees, they were paid at least a third more than my permanent employees, because all the entitlements that is due to them are paid in their hourly rate. So their hourly rate then, I had the federal award that I dealt with my staff, but we always paid over the federal award. Why do we pay over the federal award? Because we had good staff, we want to keep them. And I never wanted to be in a position where someone said, you underpaid me. So casual employees always received at least a third, if not more, than the full-time employees. Then the minister mentioned wage theft. Most of the wages infringements that were found out by big organisations like banks that had underpaid, other organisations that are underpaid, that wasn't by intention. It was by misreading the law of the land at the time in regard to industrial relations. It wasn't. At any stage, it wasn't their intention. Now, there are unscrupulous employers and there are unscrupulous employees. This is the world we live in. However, all of the employees that I can remember I dealt with, their most precious commodity was their employees. They would not only pay them correctly, but they would also be generous in their bonuses around Christmas time. You realise that in my industry, which was small business, under the federal award, when you went on holidays, you got a 17.5% loading to go on holidays. So you got paid 17.5% more for your 4 weeks holiday a year. I don't think that happens to you, Mr Deputy Speaker, because I know you don't get a holiday. This bill, I'd say closing loopholes and digging potholes would be my framework for this. The Fair Work Legislation Amendment Closing Loopholes Bill 2023 is a perplexing, complex and unwieldy document that will not improve the common good. I repeat that, it will not improve the common good. On the contrary, it will reduce productivity and thereby cause hardship to many small business owners and workers in the community. And it will shift power to unions who seek to control those who are part of the gig economy, which they have no claim on today. The bill might more accurately be called the Fair Legislation Amendment Digging Potholes Bill. Complexity. Writing in The Australian this week, Robert Godleibson, who I've got a lot of time for, talks about the practical effects of the bill, and he writes, the operations of every enterprise in Australia, ranging from the local gardener or plumber to BHP and the Commonwealth Bank, will be caught in the incredible ramifications of the 784-page industrial relations legislation, including the 500 pages of explanatory memorandum. Given the complexity and the total powers being awarded in the Minister and Fair Work Australia, No enterprise, whether they be big or small, will have any certainty as to whether they are obeying or breaking the law. He also said, and if they find that unintentionally they have broken these incredibly complex laws, they may suffer enormous penalties. An accurate analogy can be applied in the roads. Imagine if the road regulations quadruple penalties for speeding and then erect multiple speed restriction signs along those roads and cover each of them with a Hessian bag. You drive along the road completely unaware as to whether you have broken the law, but still facing huge penalties. They were his words. The bill is anti-productivity at a time when we need productivity boost in this nation. The member for Mitchell, in an address to Parliament yesterday, said this: when we look through the schedules of this bill and the explanatory memorandum of 500 pages, we learn even more about what the Minister and the government is proposing. And it is perhaps the single greatest anti-productivity industrial relations bill in our nation's history. It is the word that cannot be mentioned by the Labor Party, productivity. And while they talk about pushing up wages, wages have to come with productivity or they are simply cost increases to the consumer. That's what we're seeing in our economy, and that's what we see with this legislation. I wholeheartedly agree with the member for Mitchell in his conclusion that this bill becomes law, then there will be an increase in the cost of labour without even a thought about the anti-productivity measures that are contained within the bill. The gig economy and the $9 billion cost. I mentioned the gig economy. This bill is against those who work in the gig economy. And as the member for Mitchell said again, it was quite an impressive speech, I thought. He said the gig platform means people can create their own business faster, can do their own types of work faster, and can provide their own benefits and set their own terms and conditions. Not a bad job. They're doing it without the need for Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations to be involved. They don't need the government to be involved in this part. We have a huge industrial relations framework in this country that provides all the minimum protections. That's true. We are one of the most regulated industrial markets in the world. We are the highest wage jurisdiction in the world. And yet the government says they want to artificially put up the prices. That's the reason in this legislation when we see the attached costs of $9 billion in the government's own costings. We do not believe the figure is correct, the $9 billion. Industry is telling us that those costs are conservative because they don't model the changes to independent contractors and other forms of work that the government is proposing in the bill. The Minister should be acutely aware that we are in the midst of a cost of living crisis. I think there is consensus that our common good depends on productivity improving, and yet we have zero productivity growth. So what do the additional $9 billion in cost due to the bill mean for the community? What does it mean for those struggling with mortgages and high rents? It means an additional, unnecessary cost that will be passed on to consumers. Goods and services will become more expensive. Productivity will not increase, rather it will decline. You could not think of a worse thing to do at a worse time for Australians, the Australian economy, for our future productivity and employment. Not one in the electorate of Monash will thank you for this legislation. The Minister has said that the bill will result in only $9 billion costs, his own words, but the truth is that this could be twice or three times that amount. Astonishingly, the government did not even model the cost of changes in many parts of the bill. Why not do this? Perhaps the government is just not caring about independent contractors that are so important to our economy. Casuals are a good thing for people who like to take them on. People want to be casual because it means of increasing their income. The member for Mitchell then said on that subject, that's the truth, and the minister has to acknowledge that says, I know most people won't take up these things, so there's no problem. But why change it if it isn't a big problem? Why at 6 months should you factor in 11 factors, 4 sections, 7 subsections on this legislation for something isn't a big problem for most of the workforce? Perhaps people are going to benefit. They want to be casuals because they want higher rates of pay. Correct. The minister knows this, but he acts as if it's a major loophole. He knows it isn't a major loophole at all. He knows that a fraction of the problem here doesn't warrant the solution he has provided. Again, the agenda is very different, the member for Mitchell said. Big business organisations and small business organisations are sounding a warning to the minister and the government, whom claim that small business is exempt from the bill, but this is not accurate. Many of the provisions of in this bill are against increasing productivity. The bill won't close loopholes. It will dig potholes in the road to improve the common good. It won't improve the common good. Yesterday, the member for Mitchell again said the truth is this bill, in that the unions are under threat by modern workplace and they're unable to gain the cachet they need in these workplaces, and therefore government, in a whole range of sectors, is going to smash through what they want to describe as loopholes. There is a real sense here that the Labor Party is actually being Conservative Party. They want to take our industrial relations framework back to the 19th and 18th centuries. They want to have the contest between capital and labour that Karl Marx once spoke about. Of course, it was another famous Marx, Groucho Marx, who said, politics is the art of looking for trouble, finding it everywhere, diagnosing it incorrectly and applying the wrong remedies. This is perhaps a good analysis of what is happening with the proponents of the Closing Loopholes Bill. We have new emerging forms of employment, labour, industrial relations that need new frameworks. Frameworks that recognise productivity, frameworks that take the opportunity of those new innovations. We must not try to shut them down or feel threatened by them because of a power-based erosion in the union movement, but actually recognise that the new generations want new and different ways of working and that they should be available to people in new and different contracts. In the Australian article yesterday, Robert Gottliebsen observed, to their great credit, the independents in the Senate have refused to rush the legislation through the upper house and have delegated it to parliamentary committee, which means there will be more time to expose the damage it will create. The Senate Education and Employment Legislation Committee will conduct a public inquiry and report on February the 1st, 2024. I note that Paul Karp in The Guardian says Senator Pocock has already suggested some views about breaking up the bill, so some parts could be passed this year. Senator Pocock wants to deal with several parts this year, including banning discrimination against employees who experience family and domestic violence, the workers' compensation change and provisions criminalising wage theft. While employers may not agree with every item on the list, the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, a group, the Minerals Councils and Master Builders agree in principle with splitting the bill, allowing the discrimination and workers' compensation law changes to be dealt with immediately. I end with the phrase of Robert Gottliebsen's article, with a paraphrase of Robert Gottliebsen's article in The Australian yesterday. The Treasurer keeps expressing optimism, productivity in the future of the nation, but he has been completely trumped by the Employment Minister, who masks his massive legislation agenda with irrelevancies like paying a little more for pizzas. I invite the Treasurer to take a day off and sit down with those 784 pages and try and understand what on earth it all means to someone trying to conduct an enterprise or run a business. Maybe all ALP politicians should circulate the 784 pages among the small enterprises in their electorate so they understand the new rules that are to govern them. 784 pages of new rules that will only offend the running of your business. We oppose this legislation for a very good reason.